Hello, hello, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay? Hi. Thank you so much for joining us here for Alienation by Design, Language, Power, and the Politics of Typography. My name is Katherine Cooper, and I'm the Associate Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Rhode Island School of Design. And I want to let you know kind of our flow for today before introducing these amazing panelists. We're going to talk a little bit at the beginning. I'll introduce Amalgam, I'll introduce our panelists. Then each of them will take about 10 minutes to present some of their work to you. Some of that might be in the form of reading. Some of that might be a little bit more of like a visual presentation. So we'll get to immerse ourselves in their work. And then we're going to have a bit of a conversation amongst ourselves. And then hopefully we'll all have a conversation. We'll open it up to hear from all of you. So I wanted to start by just explaining a little bit of the origin story of, I guess, how I got here, and then how Amalgam got here. Puya Amadi is the creator and editor of Amalgam, which is an ad hoc journal that has been published since 2018. And when Puya came to me at RISD, at this point maybe a year and a half ago, and said, look, I'm focusing this issue of Amalgam on alienation, we were in the midst of supporting research on explorations in forced migration and displacement. And Puya's passion for this project was incredibly apparent, and we started to work together. Puya is not able to be here with us today, so he's asked me to read to you a little bit about him as well as the journal itself. Amalgam is an independent press that critically examines typography, language, and power as sites of ideological contestation. Through transdisciplinary projects, it challenges hegemonic epistemologies and advances radical praxis. Centering abolitionist futures, Amalgam dismantles systems of oppression at their textual and cultural foundations, fostering transformative dialogue and resistance across disciplines and publics. It was also the recipient of the Shannon Michael Cain Award this year, for which we're very grateful to the LA Art Book Fair and to Printed Matter. It was founded and edited by Puya Amadi, who is a typographer and educator whose practice navigates the fraught intersections of language and power in Swana and beyond, interrogating the spectral forces of displacement, alienation, and contested belonging. Through publishing, installations, and lecture performances, Puya engages with the material and discursive ruptures that shape typographic and linguistic ecologies. We're so lucky today to have three of our amazing artist contributors, artist, writer, educator, agitator contributors with us today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of them and then pass the mic to them. So first of all, I want to introduce Silas Munro on the end. Silas is a designer, artist, writer, researcher, curator, surfer, and descendant of the Banyole people of eastern Uganda. He is the founder of Polymode, the LGBTQ+ and minority-owned design studio working with clients across cultural spheres. Silas's contribution to Amalgam No. 5 is an essay, artist statement titled On the Consideration of a Black Grid, Part 1, part of his ongoing project, Black Grids, which explores the grid as a foundational design tool with deep ties to the artist's Ugandan heritage. We also have the amazing Tannaz Farsi. Tannaz's configurations of objects and images address the complicated networks around the conception of memory, history, identity, and geography, drawing from cultural objects, feminist histories, and theories of displacement evidenced by long-standing colonialist and authoritarian interventions into daily life. Her project-based works propose a different means of representation regarding non-Western subjects and objects that obstruct singular and conventional means of identification. Farsi is a professor of art at the University of Oregon. Images from Tannaz's Spectres, Displacement, Velocity, Acceleration in Amalgam No. 5 prolong attention to social and political events that are easily erased by governmental actions and the fast-moving nature of the news cycle. Last but not least, we have Jack Henrie Fisher, who works within, across, and against a range of technical platforms and institutional spaces. His research and practice is focused on the political mediation of language and images as graphic design. He is a partner in Other Forms, an office for design and publishing. Jack co-edits, designs, and publishes the extradisciplinary, multi-generic design journal Countersignal and a fanzine and concept blog about constitutional intersections of writing and music, Dum Diddy Dum, appropriately named. Jack is currently at work on a long-form illustrated history of the formal antagonism of the book thing with its commodity form. In From the River to the Sea, Jack closely reads this protest slogan as a medium for the organization of a movement. So I want to turn it over to Silas, who is going to take us through a Figma presentation. So we'll see about our linkage. We're not connected. We're off the grid. Help. If you could help us get connected, that would be amazing. Thank you, Alice. And I wonder if, as that is happening, we might just switch our order up a little bit so that we don't have to be in like technical limbo here. Jack, are you open to taking over for a moment and reading for us? So we're going to kick it off with Jack.
Hi, everyone. Should I use this? Should I use this? Is this better? Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about this short piece that I wrote for Amalgam and read a couple paragraphs from it. So the text is about language as it becomes political and as it becomes a collective language. This text was written very much under the influence of the U.S. student intifada in the spring of last year in Chicago, where I live. And so I went to many demonstrations, encampments, a failed occupation, other spaces of protest and resistance to the, what we were seeing unfolding, the horrors in Gaza. And so I'm a graphic designer, but I'm very interested in language. And I also do more and more editing and writing, but my interest in language comes out of, being a typographer, working with other people's texts. But so in the experience I was describing in the spring, I had this, I experienced a kind of language that was more collective. And so it was what I'm talking about is the chanting that's done in protests, and maybe you guys have had this experience of chanting collectively in protests, and it's an incredible experience. It's like one where you find yourself saying things that you have never said before. The way that speech is distributed through crowds that are marching or standing is like spontaneous. Anybody can begin a slogan, and then everyone repeats it. And it's one of the things I noticed in these events was like the number of new slogans that were being produced, like the productivity of language. Like I've been involved in other kinds of demonstrations and protests where it feels like it's the same slogans over and over again, but in the protests in solidarity with Palestine, it was like every day there were new slogans, like brand new ones. Like, so I was learning Well, I'll talk about what I learned, what one learns in that situation. Okay, so I'm going to read one paragraph now that describes the peculiarity of the production of language in that context. In this situation, the relation between speaking and thinking shifts. The semiotic economy of language is reorganized. We do not have the thought and say the words, we do both at once. We are speaking sentences that issue from outside our individual bodies and minds. We follow along, but it is not passive. The vocalization of this political speech demands the full activation of our bodies and imaginations. Our political subjectivities are simultaneously grounded and expanded in a praxis of collective speech. We feel the speech pass through our collective body. It is that which uniquely assembles our bodies as a mass. In this semiotic moment, the boundary between speech and action and between the individual and collective body is blurred, and we form a speaking movement that can go almost anywhere. Sentences and phrases link and repeat in infinite possible sequences, moving us through the space of the city and leading us into and across streets, parks, highways, buildings, campuses. So the second part of the short text that I wrote considers the particular slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," having had this kind of transformative effect, experience of speaking it, collectively and publicly, trying to reread that particular slogan, which has caused such intense shockwaves through the whole U.S. capitalist symbolic order. Maybe you guys remember. It still does, but it especially did then. And my sense was that the slogan, "From the river to the sea," became continuous with the political struggle. The slogan was not simply reflecting or representing or expressing the content of the politics of that social movement, but it was itself a site of struggle over the very meaning of the words. And that seemed really remarkable to me. Like in an earlier revolutionary episode in 2020, George Floyd uprisings, we might all remember that there was speech collectively produced after those events by institutions that did not, they did not seem to have the same kind of political conflict animating them. Like I'm thinking about like indigenous land acknowledgements and things that were more like kind of like signaling or tokenizing the content of the politics that produced it, but it was not itself a site of struggle. Okay, so I'm just going to read one more paragraph. Do I have time? Okay. "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," formulates a disarmingly simple but nonetheless radically expansive demand. Refusing to make sense of colonial dispossession, it announces a future liberation, a world where the freedom of some is not premised on walling off and imprisoning others. It is concrete in its geographic figuration and at the same time sonorously universal in its implication. It is concrete in its demand for self-determination for Palestinians between the particular geographic boundaries of the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, but its signification reaches beyond this particularity without negating it towards a universal horizon of liberation, land back to all dispossessed populations, emancipation of all oppressed populations everywhere. In Palestinian Arabic, which I don't know, but somebody told me this, the first part of the slogan literally means "from the water to the water." In a literal sense, "from the water to the water" means all the land on earth. All land on earth across the globe on which we live is between waters. The universal trajectory of the slogan is also manifested in the different permutations that have sprung up from its linguistic template in signs produced in the US Intifada. Its meaning cannot be contained. The movement of the language, both a horizontal movement from one particular place, the river, to another, the sea, as well as the vertical movement from particular to universal condition, not only echoes or reflects, but also reproduces the real political movement of bodies on the ground, massing in determined resistance and expanding solidarity. This formal continuity with social structures social struggle is the true hallmark of a slogan's correctness. And Lenin theorized, like, slogans, what constitutes the correctness of a slogan in a particular political struggle in interesting ways that I talk about later in the essay. From the river to the sea describes a boundary, a bounded space, but also implicitly a movement, something moving from one end to the other. This constant movement that refuses to be arrested, to stand still, and to be instrumentalized is the movement of emancipation. Another word for it is communism, which is the real movement that abolishes the present state of things. That's something Marx wrote in the German Ideology. So that's the kind of idea that I try to sketch in the essay, is that the slogan itself is produces a kind of conflict. And if you look at the history of the slogan and its uses by both Zionist like parties, by the Likud party, but then also by the, like, historically by the PLO in the 70s, and by other, like, groups, for emancipation of Palestine. This conflicting history is like is what makes the slogan, partly what makes it so powerful, and how, so that kind of that quality of language is what I'm trying to write about. So I'm probably, is time up? Okay, so the one thing I'll just finally say, like, I reread this, for this event, and I also talked about this in Mexico last weekend, but it's very different now talking about this. It's like I said, I wrote this in the moment, like in the spring and summer of last year, and now, and I was very, despite all of the, despite the genocide that we were watching unfolding, it was incredibly hopeful. There were so many people organizing and massing in resistance. And so it was a very hopeful moment. And so this moment is a little cloudy, the moment we're in now.
And
so
I
I'll
think,
just end with that.
yeah, I think that's perfect, because we're going to also kind of return to that provocation collectively in a moment. Thank you, Jack. So let's go back to the black grid.
Okay. Hey, I'm going to try something where these slides are going to advance, and there should be about 10 seconds per slide, and I'm just going to read like the first 10 minutes of my piece. So, from the funky, fresh black modernism of the Johnson Publishing Company's headquarters, designed by John Walter Mutusemi with Arthur Elrod and William Razor, to the expressive graffiti grids of Adam Pendleton's monumental canvases in black and white, there lives a wide-ranging matrix of possibilities for what I consider to be a black grid. As a queer black artist, designer, and design historian, living and working in conditions of a triple consciousness of overlapping marginalization, I've been in countless situations throughout my career surrounded by a sea of practices and pedagogies that don't represent me, my lived experience, or that of kindred spirits. As a result, I've committed to redirecting and centering BIPOC art and design voices and scholarship in making, writing, and education as a transformative process. To that end, I enact poetic research, which seeks to find lineages from biological ancestors, antecedents in art and design, and chosen family. A big challenge across all fields of design for those of us who want to know and tell histories are the limited pathways for black designers and design students. The rich resources, references, methods, and potential mentors are teeming in classrooms, studios, corporations, museums, publications, archives, and family lineages, chosen or otherwise. And yet, African American and African diasporic designers make up a fraction of design programs and professions. We have been historically repressed, held back, omitted, and undervalued. This is a deeply structural issue, and the devalued history of Black design and art is deeply embedded in the systems of societies and cultures informed by the impact of the colonial construction of race that came out of the transatlantic slave trade. Statistically, Black designers make up 3% of all graphic designers in the United States, while Black Americans make up 10% of the population. I felt this disparity personally throughout all of my education and career. While in graduate school studying at the California Institute of Arts in California, I was one of the very few Black students in the graphic design department. One of the reasons I ended up in the program was meeting Tashika Arsenio Sutton in 2006 at an open studio day in my application process. At the time, she was the only Black student in graphic design. Her ability to verbally express her particular way of working and interest drew me to the program. Once I became a fellow student, we found a kinship with one another. We sat next to each other. Both of us were trying to find our own histories in design, which was not being explored by our faculty. There were no Black graphic design faculty, so we became each other's resources. The culmination of her thesis project, I'm an Angry Black Woman, must have snapped me out of out of the days of absence. Tashika had found the book African Fractals by Ron Eglash and told me, Silas, you might want to think about looking at this book. She was right, and when I saw the Fractals book, it blew my mind. In it, I saw the lineage of my mother's people from Uganda. To see evidence of art and design scholarship connected to my family was amazing. At the same time, Tashika had turned me onto Saki Mafunduka's research on African alphabets. Again, this research channeled my mom's lineage from Uganda, and seeing design scholarship connected to my people changed the way I saw myself as a designer. From there, I discovered the renowned design scholar Audrey G. Bennett's text, Follow the Golden Ratio from Africa to the Bauhaus for a Cross-Cultural Aesthetic for Images, which traces a lineage of fractal ingenuity in sub-Saharan Cameroonian palace of a chief in Lagoni Bruni that likely influenced Egyptian North African temple architecture, linking to Italy through the mathematician Fibonacci, known for his so-called golden ratio that then informed European ideals of beauty circulating in the infamous Bauhaus art school. Bennett's postulations connected me to a meandering search to see myself. When I first discovered Audrey Bennett's anthology Design Studies in grad school, I didn't even realize she was Black. As I went out into the field and was teaching myself, her research became a crucial reference. During the pandemic, along with Tashika, Pierre Bowens, and the design studio Polymode, we put together a BIPOC-centered design history class, Black Design in America, African Americans and the African Diaspora in Graphic Design, 19th to the 21st Century. We asked Saki and Audrey to speak, and from there she invited Ron to speak about their work. Other speakers followed. It was our way to get the history off the page of things my colleagues and I had read in our research. During a contentious conversation in one of the online classes, a colleague named Christopher Dengwall was lecturing about the histories of Black design in mid-century Chicago, showing a special 1969 issue of Ebony called The Black Revolution, designed by Herbert Temple, and photographs of the Johnson Publishing Company building designed by John Warren Mutusemi, who I mentioned earlier. In the chat, I mentioned that the works look similar to Black grids, and I wondered, what would a history of these look like? In graphic design pedagogy in particular, a key absence is scholarship in and around the grid. There are many how-to manuals, but few texts that are critical. The grid as a construct runs underneath and through contemporary design and theoretical underpinnings, yes, is not analyzed directly. During the Q&A discussion, a prominent white design critic I look up to said, Silas, there's no such thing as a black grid. A grid is just a tool that changes depending on how you apply it. To say that I was crushed puts it mildly. As someone who's been historically marginalized, I often ask myself, what do we do with the grid? I was immediately drawn to trying to prove this academic wrong. I felt the white supremacy of that comment. I felt invalidated. I felt like I was being gaslit. That is a truth that I could feel in my bones about what a privileged design education had told me. This critic, Gunnar Swatson, was saying that a grid is an inherently neutral thing, that a grid can only be defined by how it is used. The problem with not just his comment, but a collective trigger of all the moments where design education, design for designers, and design writ large had let me down. The design of stop and frisk policies makes me uneasy anytime I see a police car ahead of me on the highway or driving in my rearview mirror. And the many awkward moments where there had been no other black or queer person to look up to or talk to in a critique. Luckily, at that moment, that was not the case for this virtual one-room schoolhouse at BIPOC Design History. According to my idol, there's something utopian about the almost infinite applicability of the conceptual idea of the grid as a toolbox. It's not a grid in the neoclassical sense of harmony, such as music, for example, but a modernist grid that contributes to progress into organizing the world in an industrial way. But then I ask myself, are we now in this place where industrial and digital progress made our world better, happier, more peaceful, resolved, and ordered almost half a century later? Not. The grid might be helpful for presenting matters that feel logical and ordered, but our world is much more complex in so many ways, politically, economically, socially. So I wonder how the grid can deal with the messiness of the world, and I feel that it has its limitations here. I ask myself, how do I feel about the grid? How do I really feel? And I often feel that the grid was imposed on me. I'm not a designer without a grid, a very particular grid, a coded grid that says right, that says just, that says beautiful. And by a particular grid, I mean the modernist grid, and by modernist, I mean a particular flavor of European influence American grid vernacular. Since I was in school, I've been told that a grid is a grid so many times, and that it is a tool, and it depends on who uses it. Over time, the use of the grid in both my client-based work and my studio work has had a varied range of strategies. In applied projects for clients, the grid is often motivated by design training to have proper typography, proper spacing, and proper alignment. The rules and codes say you have to conform in a certain way. It's not good without these design codes. In this body of work, my practice is about pushing back at this Western-based framework. But I also paradoxically love those grids and have a similar longing for their dream of structure. Through my research, making, and teaching, I feel that my grid can provide a safe space or something to refer to, which in turn allows for one to be intuitive or expressive in the structures we all face in our lives.
Thank you so much, Silas. I think that should be on. Try.
All right, can you all hear me? Okay, thank you.
Great.
So when Puya selected, he wrote and said, I'd like to include your work in this journal. He selected a wide variety of work over the past, perhaps almost 10 years. So I was having a little bit of a hard time trying to congeal a written narrative that so smoothly and easily can trespass from one work into the other. So I'm just going to read you some segments of writing from the different elements until I hit my 10 minutes here. I work across object, image, and language with varied forms and materials, sometimes made by hand, sometimes ready-made, attempting to prolong attention to social and political events that are easily erased by governmental actions and the fast-moving, discardable nature of news cycle. History, diaspora, language, feminism, spatial relations are the overlapping territories that create avenues for my material and sensory engagement. My work is rooted in and revels in formal and material structures, yet it has always originated in and continues to return to the politics that define my experience as a human, stemming from my own relocation to the United States from Iran after a revolution, living in a country at war, and arriving in the US during the Iran-Contra affair. So really, it was not so shocking to hear the Executive Order 13769 issued in 2017 titled, Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States, informally known as the Muslim Ban, barring citizens from Iran, Syria, Libya, Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen from entering the United States. I started to wonder about the site responsiveness and meaning of this word immigrant, and its unraveling of different subject positions that situate value depending on where one departs from and under which conditions one can enter different geographic locations. Colonist, defector, exile, refugee becomes a call back and forth that engages a multiplicity of belonging. Here the words are cut away from an acrylic sheet and screen printed with two different satellite maps. The left, Fort Bragg, one of the largest military bases in the US, named after a Confederate general, and the right, Middle East, an imprecise designation that centers its location through the proximity and gaze of Europe and is formed through a legacy of foreign intervention. I'm going to be mismatching here, but you'll see. The measure 1 and 2 similarly take a word and generate a set of relations through potential meanings. Each word opens up a single synonym for the previous one to explore the conceptual structuring of meaning systems and their potential external impact. It became a kind of game to see how soon the word measure, which is not initially mentioned, would appear and what other directions can emerge from following the chain of synonyms. From there, I began to structure something like a poem that carries a performative quality for the reader. The body becomes present in the act of reading, summoned by the form itself as the word shifts in size and material quality. The writing, moving directly from my unmediated hand, initiates a sense of speed and purpose and proposes an urgency in relationship between seeing and understanding. So I'm going to read a little excerpt from that. I would read it as would be standard to set quality for the condition is an infection, period. Complaint, exclamation, objection, exclamation, opposition becomes a battle or contest that drives race, period. What origin, what basis, what condition creates order, perpetuates systems, advances structural arrangements, no deal. Control is a means of rule, no order, sequence to generate pattern and gauge or measure alignment by count, by feel, sensing a point to position the state as powerful. In the Persian language, the rhomboid or diamond shape stands for 0 and can also be found above, below, or in the middle of letters to demarcate different sounds in the alphabet. It is created from the press of the calligrapher's pen to paper, a point of departure for understanding a physical imprint and time, locating the internal experience of the body to the external world. It makes sense that this locational device, a contact of instrument to paper, is used as a system of measurement for Perso-Arabic calligraphy. The system of proportion for written language was started in the 10th century. A fixed number of rhomboids demarcate the shape of each letter, creating conformity and legibility in script. Looking at examples of Kufic script and architectural details in Iran and neighboring countries, you can see that the compositional strategies of text and geometry propose a simultaneity of legible and illegible content. This configuration is an example of an iconography that reveals an interplay between opacity and transparency to generate a complex relationship between form and meaning by engaging something greater than what is visible. In her book, Veil and Words, the academic and writer Farzaneh Milani discusses the lack of representation of women at Persepolis, the Achaemenid dynastic center that lies in monumental ruin in southern Iran. While there is evidence of women owning land and conducting business at the site, there are no visual images of women. She cites this as an example of the cultural discomfort around Iranian women claiming public space while fully participating in everyday life and continuation of this practice into contemporary culture. In 2016, I started to research and collect names of Iranian women that have in some way participated in public intellectual output through political activism, art making, literature, music, culinary arts. I wanted to make the category of intellectual output broad, one that celebrates and examines joy as well as struggle to trace the history of women's resistance in Iran. This research manifested in the names, an ongoing work that observes this resistance by uniting and linking the names of historic and contemporary women living in Iran and abroad. I used a system for generating a proportioned script in Perso-Arabic calligraphy, the stacked rhomboid form that I mentioned earlier, to create a font from which I transliterated the names of 100 Iranian women that have in some way participated in public intellectual output. Similar to systems of measurement used to create a standard in the field of writing, my gesture attempts to set these women as a cultural and intellectual standard that is not always collectively visible. And this led to another work titled Corruption on Earth, which was installed on the window, and it named 37 female political prisoners that were being held in Iranian jails in this window of time that I had to work on this exhibition in 2017. The window, a median between public and private space, can be seen as a spatial metaphor for incarceration and the veiling of the body, that one can be placed in jail for corruption on earth, one of the many charges, along with insulting the sacred and involuntary manslaughter, which is self-defense against rape, dictates the state as the utmost authority on a subject's interior life, her ability to dream, to exist with rights to her physical presence. There is great irony also in this direct definition of the words. Is the earth the planet, dirt, or terrain? Does corruption indicate evil, contamination, or indecency? The paneled structure of the windows allowed me to think about the composition of the words akin to a style of Iranian writing called tahshiyeh or hashiye navisi, loosely translated as end writing or margin writing, and it's found in both secular and religious texts where the margins present other non-hierarchical information to allow parallel or extended readings to emerge. In case of novels or poetry, it could be a secondary character that is extrapolated, and in religious texts, it may be an interpretation. In Corruption on Earth, the names comprise the center panel of the window, while the exterior columns catalog the crimes according to the state. In 2021, I was asked to participate in an exhibition that created prototypes for how monuments and memorials can exist in public space, and I made this work of signs as an initial foray into nomadic signs that can create performative markers in public space. Sculpture has historically been tied to the ideas of the monumental through subject matter, scale, and materials that can weather and stay fixed in a single space. Inherently, monuments in our public space instruct us how we can or can't imagine ourselves within the intangible power of social and national identity. As art historian Sarah Lewis reminds us, the forms and materials of sculptural objects, particularly figurative iterations that exist from the miniature to the monumental, predetermine the value of who and what is accounted for in our society into aesthetic conventions. In this work, I wanted to channel the power of the monumental into an everyday object, one that can bring agency, one that can be yielded by many or one, and allows us to create public conversation as daily acts. The citizen performer or operator creates new context for the words as their bodies move around the environment, as we absorb the news of the day and look onto the signs, letting our imagination fill in the spaces between words, bodies, and sights. This work imagines a single living person as a monument, and the idea was generated from seeing an incredible image of Nasrin Sotoudeh, the Iranian lawyer and human rights activist who stands outside of the Bar Association in Tehran, Iran, demanding that she should be allowed to work. She has been periodically jailed and banned from working because she represented cases for journalists and human rights activists, as well as supporting and challenging the given rights of women and girls. Women such as Vida Movahed, who climbed onto a utility box on Engelab Street. It was December 2017. She wasn't wearing her required overcoat or headscarf, which she tied to the end of a stick, waving it like a peace flag. Our new words and signs in public space don't have to deny where we come from, that our local is not just one nation, one continent, single affinities, that the structure of extraction and exploitation is a common thread that links our cause and is the continual condition for our displacement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tannaz. And thank all of you. I wonder if for this moment, we might be able to shine a little bit of light on the situation. So I realized that I didn't actually read to you what Puya has written about this installment of Amalgam, which I think is a really important frame for the conversation that we're all going to have. So I'm going to read that to you right now and then ask our panelists a question. So the fifth installment of Amalgam critically engages with the politics of alienation, exploring how these dynamics serve as conduits for violence across various scales, from forced displacement and imprisonment to erasure, annexation, and genocide. By centering the alienated subject, the issue interrogates the intersectional forces, border regimes, settler colonialism, racial capitalism, heteropatriarchy, and technocratic futurism that create the conditions for hegemonic language of othering to emerge and perpetuate violence. In the process of rendering certain populations as alien, both material and discursive languages are strategically engineered to enforce divisions along lines of race, gender, class, nationality, and other markers, thereby reinforcing the dichotomy between the dominant and the subordinate or subhuman. I'm going to read that last sentence one more time because it's so rich and dense, and I think it echoes where we are now. In the process of rendering certain populations as alien, both material and discursive languages are strategically engineered to enforce divisions along lines of race, gender, class, nationality, and other markers, thereby reinforcing the dichotomy between the dominant and the subordinate or subhuman. So I want to turn to our panelists and kind of acknowledge the fact that you all created this work, wrote these words, thought these thoughts for an issue of Amalgam that was published in October of 2024. Since then, here in the United States, we've lived through a regime change. A number of other governments, regimes, et cetera, have also changed. So, given all of that, what was true then that is still true now regarding oppression, global and national violences, and alienation? And what has changed? How do you reflect now on some of these works that you published in the 2024, in this 2025 lived experience and political climate? And what are some of the evolutions of these projects? Silas, I kind of want to put you on the spot because you titled it Part 1. And it's like, okay, so Part 2.
Yeah, I mean, like that's a lot, that question that you're asking. But I don't know, it was just nice because we had a chat before this, which I think was its own panel too. And I think a lot of what I was feeling after that conversation was a lot of like support and just like being in dialogue. And I feel like maybe what's the same from that work is this idea of like alchemy as a tool for like dealing with things that are very difficult, and like the creative alchemy of language, whether that's like a typographic language or like a relanguaging of an experience. And that's kind of what I heard from Jack and Tannaz today, like kind of these transformative acts that are done in community, like that can be like visual or typographic, and just like how powerful that is to like try to see the unseen of oppression, like through different formal like interventions. And like for me, that was really I was just typing and listening to both of you, and there were like definitely different ways of like each one of us, I think, relanguaging things to like reform them in certain ways. Like for me, a grid. Yeah. So I don't know if I kind of captured an answer to your really deep question.
Absolutely. Jack?
Something actually that we were talking about when we all had that conversation earlier that that was brought to mind by your question in terms of how things have changed, what the terms of what the different terms of struggle at the moment, and the consequences of that for the different things that we're kind of talking about in our projects. so one thing that I've become really aware of is this, in this like new climate of repression, that things are really different actually in terms of the way language can be, in terms of having to watch what we say. So before before Trump was elected, from the river to the sea, that particular slogan was creating specific problems for a lot of people in universities and other places. But, the scale has dramatically shifted and increased now. So people are being deported. People are being incarcerated, on this particular issue. And so one of the consequences that I've been feeling in different spaces is that we have to be more careful about what we say, because our words can actually target us. And so I have never before felt this kind of chill on actual public speech. And it's a new situation for me. I think other people have felt that in different ways. But I was also thinking, Silas, about like the idea of the grid being a kind of template of visibility in a way. That would be one way to talk about it. Like it's a kind of like, formula for producing, visuality or something. But the refusal to be visible, and so also now like the refusal to speak so that you don't get targeted, that is a particular kind of project, and that alters semiotics, our language, but also like our art. But and they're all, it's not like this has never happened before historically, and there's like traditions, many traditions, of resistance to repression and domination that are founded in these kind of clandestine, fugitive, like ways of publishing, of speaking, and so it's a different kind of way of meaning things. So you have to say things in a way that won't get you targeted, or through channels that can't be surveilled. All of that whole kind of underground fugitive thing that's easily like romanticized on the left actually seems like it's happening, and I'm curious about like the implications that has for, not only public speech but art making, design.
It's curious that you're pointing that out, Jack, because also here we are at LA Art Book Fair, which is like popping off on a Saturday. Like there are tons of people here for this in-person event devoted to language, to publication, in a radical way. So I just want to kind of contextualize that. But Tannaz, I wonder if you want to respond.
Yeah, I think that, like that condition of fear of speaking has been bred into me since a young age. And I think maybe the reversal of that only a few years ago I felt free to speak in or take a position publicly against the Iranian state, or speak about the kinds of political situations that are happening, where my work had always been about that, politically engaged that way, and using the language of like opacity to couch that because of a potential idea of a return. Like maybe you can go back at one point and re-engage with your culture. But I think after the Women Life Freedom movement in 23, where, sorry, this feels very emotional too, where people were en masse out on the street, the biggest turnouts since the revolution. And revolution also has a very hard-edged sword, position for, I think, a lot of Iranians, right? That word revolution, or what can be brought about. We think about revolution as this utopian, like shift of something better, but it's not always that, like, so that's also historically an interesting idea to return to. But yeah, so I think since the Women, Life, Freedom, there was this moment of hope, and I think similarly with what you were talking about with the Palestinian movement, of that there is some kind of traction and forward movement. Same thing with 2020 and the Black Lives movement, right? Like, it's just like we stutter again and again onto these kind of uprisings, but they don't seem to fully create traction. And I'm very curious about that, being the age I am right now, versus 20 years ago, and thinking about these ideas over a period of time, as I'm sure we all have. And yeah, I mean, what can you say when there are white South African refugees that are being brought into this country under the premise of their farmland being taken away, when for the past 40 years that issue has been prominent within Palestinian territories, right? Like, what can you say or do when the farce is at such a level and the conversation, the language shifts the conversation, so there is no room for speech. So I don't know, I feel like I can't get away from this. Yeah, like, it's maybe a moment of regrouping, or thinking what can be done, or thinking how these movements have failed us, or we failed through these movements in the past, and how we can proceed. But art,
or
I
they've
feel
been
like,
crushed,
or they've been crushed, right?
and we need
That's
to
another way.
we need to fight back.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one. There are failed revolutions, and then there are revolutions that do not go all the way forward, that are stopped because we're overpowered by state violence, or whatever it is, and
I love this also saying of, just to jump on that, is that activism is a generational activity, that it's like you're continually building on the shoulders of others, and I think that's what you're bringing up now. Yeah, so like thinking about how to proceed in fugitivity, right? Maybe this might be the moment.
Yeah, I feel like, Tannaz, what you were saying was really resonating with me, like thinking about my mom talking about growing up, like being careful what you say on the phone in Uganda, and just the histories of Idi Amin and like the violence which like affected my family personally. My uncle Silas, who I'm named after, was assassinated, which I talk about later in the piece, and just this idea of like, when I went to Uganda in 2021, like having this fear around being gay and like the repressive anti-homosexuality laws there, but then like there were all these conversations that were happening, including like an election that was kind of a farce, that the two different generations, my cousins, like seeing it as that, but then my like uncle and aunt, or one of them, like not seeing that corruption. It just kind of was like a weird, like bizarre world where those things are now like happening in the United States that are happening in Uganda, or potentially could be like same with like queer oppression and so many other things that are being restricted. So it's this like weird kind of language and culture folding back on itself in a way. And I do think like what you're saying of like the way that we've been like supported by other activists or other people who have like spoken truth to power, and how we can channel that like from previous generations, but also channel it with each other. I feel like this is like, and having a conversation like this is like, this is the medicine like to deal with that like kerfuffle. And like Katherine, what you're saying about all the people that are here like celebrating cultural production and like independent creativity and like unusual ways of making, I think does feel like what we're talking about now has like a wider ripple outside of this room.
Agreed. Given that, I want to make sure that we open it up to our cohabitants of this room, our audience members. So we've touched on many things: alienation, citizenship, migration, the black grid, artistic production, the materiality of language, protest. I'm curious if we have any questions or musings from our audience.
Okay, sorry, my mind's like all over the place, but I guess it relates to everything, because so here in Los Angeles, there's been a lot of like organization or a lot of people gathering together. There's been a lot of marches, like specifically like by the Palestinian Youth Movement. But it's really interesting because we have like all kinds of people, especially like Mexican people in Los Angeles because we're so close to the border. And so there's like the thing about the spontaneity of like the slogans and stuff. So like there was from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. But we also had from Gaza to Mexico, these walls have got to go. So like that really resonated with us. And so I guess like that's like it really connected everybody. But you also see people from like other countries. We had like talkers or speakers from like South Korea talking about like a divided Korea, like how, but also just how a lot of like most of South America and other countries across the world have been impacted by like the United States or other European countries, like a lot of oppression. So it's really nice to see like a form of fighting back, right? But also want to talk about like censorship really quick. So we talk about grids. So like for example, Instagram, like a lot of people curate their like online presence and stuff like that. Or you have people putting in effort for all these flyers for all these events, but there's a lot of censorship. They don't get like any visibility. But in person, it's much different. You have people like handcrafting signs. You have like beautiful paintings of like watermelons. You have like drawings of pop culture characters aligning themselves with Palestine or other movements, which is it's really interesting. And so that's just what I wanted to bring up. I'm sorry I'm all over the place, but yeah.
Don't apologize. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that kind of exploration and synthesis of your experience at the panel. We are almost at time, but I wonder if I'd love to hear from you all to respond to this kind of tapestry that you've laid out for us, particularly maybe around this question of, you know, attention, right? Tannaz, your work really addresses attention, and you kind of alluded to the different modes of attention and making that are happening in protest movements. So maybe in just a word or two, what is commanding or seducing your attentions at this moment in your work and in your political and lived experiences?
Oh my goodness. Wow. What is commanding on me? I've been reading a lot of fiction. That's
amazing.
That's actually maybe I'm thinking about language and I don't want to use the word world building, but thinking about delving deeply into emotions and spaces of other people. I'm going to stop there because you said 2 words and I'm way over.
Oh God. Well, I mean, I think the one thing that that I've been thinking as we face the threat, these various threats in the university, for instance, from the federal government to actually shut down any like anti-racist work or like work that's focused on ameliorating harm to trans people, like all this fucking horrible stuff. One thing I think is like, wouldn't it be great if we had autonomous institutions that were not vulnerable to state repression? How do we build autonomous institutions that can, stand up to fascism? Because that doesn't depend on fascism. That's a huge project.
I love that. Autonomous institutions, novels.
I feel like for me, I love the share from you about sort of this tapestry of things. For me, it's been like surf community in LA and like just actually things IRL, I feel like have brought a lot of joy and a lot of healing to like be in small groups of people. And I think specifically the way the wildfires were like affecting the Bay and the way that like I've seen surfers and then even just like people who are like just thinking more cognizantly about like the runoff from the Palisades fire and how that like impacted things and people wanting to engage and like just the generosity that I felt in LA like in the weeks after the fires, I feel like was really a profound thing that does feel like lasting in different ways. So that the idea of like how do we coalesce like at a kind of more community level feels really powerful to me.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to all of you for being here today. Pick up your copy of Amalgam number 5 at K6 or Q14, other forms, which is where Jack will be.
We also have issues.
And we do have copies here if you want to come see us in the back while we let the next panel set up. So.
Thank you so much.